The transport truck lurched to a halt at 0430 hours, sending 37 future Rangers sliding forward on worn metal benches. Through the canvas flaps, the Georgia dawn leaked pale and cold across Fort Benning's training grounds. Steam rose from the asphalt where yesterday's rain still pooled in shallow depressions. The air carried the sharp bite of pine sap and diesel exhaust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stepped down from the cab, his boots striking concrete with deliberate precision. His voice cut through the morning stillness like a blade through canvas. Welcome to the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. You have 60 seconds to form up outside this vehicle. Your assessment begins now. Bodies scrambled over tailgates and equipment bags. Boots hit pavement in rapid succession, followed by the metallic clatter of gear being shouldered and adjusted. The formation took shape with military efficiency, but not perfection. 3 candidates stumbled slightly. One dropped his water bottle. Another's rucksack swung loose from an improperly secured strap dot in the 3rd row, 2nd position from the left. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at attention. Her frame was compact but solid, shoulders squared beneath a uniform that fit with the precision of someone who understood the importance of details. Her dark hair was pulled into a regulation bun, not a strand out of place despite the rough transport. Her brown eyes remained fixed forward, focused on the middle distance beyond Rodriguez's shoulder. The mockery started before Rodriguez had finished his opening remarks. "Look who made it to the big leagues," came a whisper from behind her. The voice belonged to Specialist Marcus Hayes, a tank mechanic from Fort Hood whose biceps strained the sleeves of his ACUs. His Texas drawl carried just far enough to reach the ears around him. "Guess they're really desperate for numbers this cycle." Specialist Trevor Williams, standing 2 positions to Hayes's right, suppressed a snicker. Williams had arrived from the 82nd Airborne with a chest full of ribbons and an attitude to match. His pale blue eyes swept over Vasquez's profile with undisguised skepticism. "Hope she can keep up when the real work starts," he muttered under his breath. Vasquez heard every word. Her expression never changed. Her posture never shifted. She had learned long ago that reaction was weakness, and weakness was currency these men would spend without hesitation. Rodriguez continued his briefing, outlining the phases ahead. Physical assessments, combat simulations, leadership rotations, and field exercises that would push every candidate to their breaking point. The Georgia heat would climb into the 90s by midday. The humidity would make breathing feel like drowning in thick air. Sleep would become a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours. "Some of you will quit before lunch," Rodriguez said, his gaze sweeping the formation. "Others will make it through the first week before they realize they don't belong here. A handful will complete the program. Even fewer will earn the right to wear the Ranger tab." Behind Vasquez, Sergeant First Class David Kim shifted his weight. Kim had served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 10th Mountain Division. His service record was spotless, his reputation solid. But he had never served alongside women in combat roles, and his uncertainty showed in the way his eyes lingered on the back of Vasquez's head. "This is going to be interesting," he said quietly to the man beside him. The formation broke apart as Rodriguez directed them toward the barracks. Candidates retrieved their gear and began the trek across the compound. The buildings were stark and functional, concrete blocks painted in military beige with windows that reflected the morning sun like dead eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a cadre member's voice echoed across a different training area, shouting instructions that blended into the ambient noise of military life. Vasquez shouldered her rucksack and fell into step with the group. Her pack was heavier than regulation required. Inside, beneath the standard issue gear, she carried additional equipment, that most of her fellow candidates had never considered necessary. A compact field manual on small unit tactics, annotated in her precise handwriting. A waterproof case, containing backup navigation tools. Emergency medical supplies that exceeded the basic first aid requirements. The weight didn't bother her. She had been carrying heavy loads since childhood, when her father, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, had made weighted hiking a family tradition in the mountains outside Colorado Springs. Strength isn't just muscle, he had told her during those early morning climbs. It's the decision to keep moving when your body wants to quit. Specialist Jason Torres, a combat engineer from Fort Leonard Wood, jogged up alongside her as they approached the barracks. His expression was neutral, professional. Unlike the others, he hadn't participated in the whispered commentary. "Elena Vasquez, right?" he said. "I read about your service record in the briefing materials. Impressive tour with the MPs in Iraq." "Just doing my job," Vasquez replied without looking over. Her tone was measured, neither friendly nor dismissive. She had learned to be cautious about early alliances. Men who seemed supportive in public sometimes revealed different attitudes when the pressure mounted. "That convoy ambush outside Fallujah," Torres continued. "Taking command when your lieutenant got hit. Getting everyone home. That's not just doing your job, that's leadership." Hayes, walking close enough to overhear, let out a derisive laugh. Leadership? She was probably hiding behind the engine block while the real soldiers did the work. His voice carried no attempt at discretion now. Several other candidates turned their heads. Vasquez stopped walking. The group around her slowed, sensing the sudden tension. She turned to face Hayes directly, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "You have something to say, Specialist?" Hayes was 6 inches taller and 40 pounds. Heavier, his presence was designed to intimidate, and he had used it effectively throughout his military career. "Just wondering if you're here to prove something, or if this is some kind of publicity stunt. Equal opportunity and all that." The circle of observers grew wider. Williams stepped closer, his arms crossed over his chest. Kim remained silent but watched with obvious interest. Torres frowned but didn't intervene. "I'm here for the same reason you are," Vasquez said. Her voice remained level, controlled. "To earn the Ranger tab. If you think gender gives anyone an advantage in this program, you're going to be disappointed." "We'll see about that," Hayes replied. "When the smoke clears and the real pressure hits, we'll see who's still standing." Rodriguez's voice cut across the tension before it could escalate. Further. "Problem here, candidates?" The group snapped to attention. "No, Staff Sergeant," came the unified response. "Outstanding. You have 15 minutes to stow gear and report to the obstacle course. I suggest you use that time wisely instead of running. Your mouths." Rodriguez's eyes lingered on Hayes for an extra second before he turned and walked away. The candidates dispersed toward their assigned bunks. The barracks were Spartan, designed for function rather than comfort. Steel-framed beds, with thin mattresses, metal lockers that had seen decades of use, and windows that let in more noise than light. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and the accumulated sweat of thousands of previous candidates. Vasquez claimed a bunk near the center of the bay, neither seeking privacy nor avoiding it. She methodically unpacked her gear, each item placed with deliberate precision. Her movements were economical, practiced. While other candidates rushed through their setup or gathered in small groups to continue conversations, she worked in focused silence. From across the bay, she caught fragments of ongoing discussion. Williams was holding court near the far wall, regaling a small audience with stories from his airborne unit. His voice carried confidence and authority, the tone of someone accustomed to being heard and believed. "Basic infantry tactics," he was saying. "That's what this whole program comes down to. Physical strength, mental toughness, and the ability to lead men in combat. Some people have it, some people don't. Hayes nodded agreement from his nearby bunk. No room for social experiments when lives are on the line. Rangers have a reputation to maintain. Vasquez finished arranging her gear and sat on the edge of her bunk to check her boots. The leather was broken in but well maintained, the laces replaced recently. Small details that could make the difference between success and failure in the days ahead. Don't let them get in your head, Torres said quietly. He had approached while she was focused on her equipment. Some guys just can't handle change. They're not in my head, Vasquez replied. They're just noise. Torres studied her expression for a moment. You've dealt with this before. Every day for 8 years, she said. Nothing new here. The truth was more complicated than her dismissive response suggested. Every assignment had brought similar challenges, but the stakes had never been this high. The military police corps had provided opportunities to prove her competence, but Ranger School was different. This was elite training, the pathway to leadership positions that could define the rest of her military career. Her father had warned her about the politics she would face. They'll test you differently, he had said during their last conversation. Before she shipped out, not just physically but mentally. They'll want to see if you'll break under pressure that has nothing to do with the mission. She had understood then, and she understood now. The mockery and skepticism weren't really about her capabilities. They were about tradition, comfort zones, and fear of change. But understanding didn't make it easier to endure. The whistle blast that signaled formation came exactly 15 minutes after Rodriguez's warning. Candidates streamed out of the barracks, adjusting gear and checking equipment as they moved. The obstacle course sprawled across 2 acres of Georgia terrain, a collection of wooden barriers, rope climbs, and mud-filled ditches designed to test both individual skill and group cohesion. Rodriguez stood at the starting line, flanked by 3 other cadre members whose expressions revealed nothing. This is not a race, he announced. This is an assessment. We're evaluating your technique, your decision-making, and your ability to work as part of a team. Some obstacles require individual effort. Others demand cooperation. Choose wisely. The first obstacle was a 12-foot wall with a single rope hanging from the top. Candidates were required to climb over using only upper body strength and technique. Williams stepped forward immediately, his airborne training evident in the fluid way he scaled the barrier. Hayes followed, his raw power compensating for less refined technique, but still achieving the required result. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Vasquez approached the wall third. The rope felt rough against her palms, familiar from countless hours of practice at previous duty stations. She wrapped her legs around the line and began her ascent, each movement deliberate and controlled. At the top, she paused to assess the descent before dropping to the other side with practiced ease. Not bad for a girl, Hayes commented as she landed. The sarcasm was thick enough to cut. Vasquez ignored him and moved toward the next challenge. The rope bridge stretched 40 feet across a water-filled pit, its wooden planks deliberately spaced to require careful footwork. Several candidates had already started across, their progress slow and cautious. She stepped onto the first plank and immediately felt the bridge respond to her weight. The structure swayed slightly, requiring constant adjustments to maintain balance. Halfway across, the candidate ahead of her, a nervous-looking private from Fort Bragg, froze as the bridge began to oscillate more dramatically. "I can't do this," he said, his voice tight with panic. "It's moving too much." Vasquez moved up behind him, her voice calm and encouraging. "Focus on the next step, not the destination. Feel the rhythm of the bridge and move with it, not against it." "Easy for you to say," the private replied. "You're not scared of heights." The truth was that Vasquez was terrified of heights. Had been since childhood, when a fall from a tree had left her with a broken arm and a lasting fear of elevation. But fear was information, not instruction. It told you what to be careful about, not what was impossible. Fear keeps you alive, she told the private. Use it to stay focused. One step at a time. She guided him through the next few movements, her steady presence calming his nerves enough to continue. When they reached the other side, he looked back at her with genuine gratitude. "Thanks," he said. "I wouldn't have made it without your help." From the sideline, Rodriguez made a note on his clipboard. The interaction had been brief but revealing. Leadership wasn't always about giving orders. Sometimes it was about helping others find their own strength. The obstacles continued throughout the morning. Rope climbs that tested upper body endurance. Crawls under barbed wire that required patience and technique. Team-building exercises that demanded communication and coordination. With each challenge, patterns began to emerge. Williams excelled at individual tasks that played to his airborne background. His confidence was infectious, and other candidates naturally looked to him for guidance during group exercises. Hayes dominated through sheer physical power, attacking obstacles with brute force that often succeeded despite poor technique. Vasquez approached each challenge methodically. She studied the requirements, identified the most efficient approach, and executed with precision. Her times weren't always the fastest, but her technique was consistently sound. More importantly, she had begun to earn the respect of candidates who had initially dismissed her. During the rope climb, she noticed Kim struggling with his grip strength. His previous injuries, sustained during an IED blast in Afghanistan, had left him with reduced feeling in his left hand. The limitation wasn't severe enough to disqualify him from the program, but it made certain tasks more difficult. Without drawing attention to his struggle, Vasquez demonstrated an alternative grip technique that relied more on leg strength and body positioning. Kim adapted quickly, completing the obstacle and nodding his thanks. "Where did you learn that?" he asked afterward. "Trial and error," she replied. "Sometimes you have to find a different way to reach the same goal." The morning session concluded with a group navigation exercise. Each team of 5 candidates was given a map, compass, and list of coordinates to locate within the surrounding forest. The terrain was dense with pine trees and undergrowth, crisscrossed by unmarked trails that could lead rescuers or lost wanderers deeper into confusion. Vasquez found herself assigned to a team with Hayes, Williams, Torres, and a quiet communications specialist named Sergeant Paul Mitchell. The group dynamics were immediately apparent. Williams assumed command based on his rank and confidence. Hayes positioned himself as the primary navigator, spreading the map across a fallen log and tracing potential routes with his finger. "Straightforward grid search," Hayes declared. "We'll move fast and hard, hit each coordinate in sequence, and be back before the other teams know what hit them." Mitchell raised a hand tentatively. "What about terrain features? Some of these coordinates are in a pretty rough country." "Rough country is what separates Rangers from regular infantry," Williams replied. "We adapt and overcome." Vasquez studied the map over Hayes's shoulder, noting several potential issues with their planned route. The most direct path between coordinates 2 and 3 crossed a steep ravine that wasn't clearly marked on the topographical features. Coordinate 4 was located in an area that satellite imagery suggested might be swampy, based on the vegetation patterns. "Have you considered an alternate route?" she asked. "This path through Sector 7 looks problematic." Hayes looked up from the map with obvious irritation. "You got a better idea, or are you just going to criticize?" Vasquez pointed to a series of contour lines that indicated a gentler slope around the ravine. "This approach adds maybe 10 minutes to our time, but keeps us on solid ground. And if we approach coordinate 4 from the north instead of the south, we can avoid what looks like wetland terrain." Williams studied her suggestions for a moment. His initial inclination was to dismiss them, but the logic was sound. "Fine," he said. "We'll try your route. But if it slows us down, we're switching back to the original plan." The team set off into the forest, Hayes leading with the compass and Williams setting the pace. The pine canopy filtered the midday sun into dappled patterns that shifted across the forest floor. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of decomposing leaves. For the first hour, the modified route proved effective. They located coordinates 1 and 2 ahead of schedule, Hayes's navigation skills complemented by Vasquez's terrain analysis. The team worked efficiently, each member contributing according to their strengths. The trouble started as they approached coordinate 3. The ravine that Vasquez had identified on the map turned out to be deeper and more treacherous than even she had anticipated. What appeared to be a manageable slope from a distance revealed itself as a near-vertical drop of 30 feet, with loose rock and unstable footing. "Told you this was a bad idea," Hayes muttered, peering over the edge. "Now we've wasted time getting here, and we still have to backtrack." Williams checked his watch and frowned. "We're behind schedule. Should have stuck with the original plan." The criticism stung, but Vasquez forced herself to focus on solutions rather than blame. She studied the ravine more carefully, looking for alternatives that wouldn't require a complete route change. "There," she said, pointing to a section where a fallen tree had created a natural bridge across the gap. "It's not ideal, but it's passable." Torres followed her gaze and shook his head. "That tree doesn't look stable. One wrong step and somebody's taking the 30-foot fall." "Then we make sure we don't take a wrong step," Vasquez replied. "Mitchell, you're the lightest. You go first and test the stability. If it holds your weight, the rest of us follow one at a time." The plan was risky, but the alternative was a 2-hour detour that would put them well behind the other teams. Williams weighed the options for 30 seconds before nodding his agreement. Mitchell crossed first, his movements careful and deliberate. The log flexed under his weight but held firm. Torres followed, then Hayes, each passage proving the route viable if not comfortable. Williams went fourth, his heavier frame causing more significant movement in the makeshift bridge. Halfway across, a section of bark broke loose under his boot, sending him lurching sideways toward the edge. For a moment that felt like an eternity, he teetered on the brink of falling. Vasquez moved without thinking. She had already started. Across behind him, close enough to grab his outstretched hand and help him regain his balance. The assist was brief but decisive, allowing Williams to steady himself and complete the crossing. "Thanks," he said when they reached the other side. His tone was different now, carrying a note of genuine respect that hadn't been there before. They located coordinates 3 and 4 without further incident, Vasquez's terrain reading proving accurate in both cases. The approach to coordinate 4 from the north had indeed avoided a marshy area that would have slowed their progress significantly. As they headed back toward the starting point, the team dynamics had shifted subtly. Hayes still carried the compass and Williams still set the pace, but they had begun to defer to Vasquez's input on route selection and terrain assessment. The change wasn't dramatic or acknowledged explicitly, but it was real. They returned to base camp 40 minutes ahead of the next team, their success generating approving nods from the cadre members who recorded their time. Rodriguez approached as they turned in their equipment. "Good work out there," he said, "especially adapting to terrain challenges. That's the kind of problem-solving we need to see." As the team dispersed toward the evening meal, Torres fell into step beside Vasquez. "That bridge crossing," he said, quick thinking. "Team effort," she replied. "Williams would have done the same for any of us." Torres smiled. "Maybe, but you didn't hesitate. That says something about character." The mess hall was filled with the usual post-exercise energy. Candidates recounted their experiences, compared routes and times, and speculated about the challenges ahead. The food was standard military fare, designed for nutrition rather than flavor, but hunger made everything palatable. Vasquez sat with Torres and Mitchell. Their conversation focused on lessons learned from the day's exercises. Across the room, she noticed Williams in an animated discussion with Hayes and several other candidates. Occasionally, Williams would gesture in her direction, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. The shift was small but significant. Respect had to be earned one interaction at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of character at a time. The mockery hadn't disappeared entirely, but cracks had begun to appear in the wall of skepticism. As the evening wound down and candidates prepared for the next day's challenges, Vasquez sat on her bunk and made notes in a small journal. Not official logs or training records, but personal observations about leadership, teamwork, and the complex dynamics of earning trust in an environment built on tradition and prejudice. Outside, the Georgia night settled over Fort Benning with the subtle sounds of a military base at rest. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities to prove herself, and new challenges to overcome. But tonight, for the first time since arriving, she felt like she belonged in this place. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but she had taken the first steps, and they had been solid ones. The pre-dawn darkness at Fort Benning carried a chill that cut through even the heaviest PT gear. At 0500 hours, 34 candidates stood in formation outside the barracks there, breath visible in small clouds that dissipated quickly in the humid Georgia air. 3 candidates had already dropped from the program, one for a stress fracture, another for failing the initial psychological evaluation, and a third who had simply walked away during the night without explanation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the cadre building carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a clipboard thick with assessment forms. His boots crunched across the gravel as he approached the formation, each step deliberate and measured. Behind him, 2 other instructors followed at a distance, their faces shadowed in the artificial light from the nearby buildings. "Today we begin combat simulations," Rodriguez announced, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. "Urban warfare scenarios, close-quarters battle techniques, and tactical decision-making under pressure. You'll be evaluated not just on your individual performance, but on your ability to function as part of a cohesive unit." Elena Vasquez stood in the second rank, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. She had been awake since 0430, using the extra time to review urban warfare manuals and mentally rehearse close-quarters movement techniques. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from countless training sessions in their basement. "Preparation is the difference between success and survival. Never walk into a situation blind." Beside her, Sergeant Paul Mitchell shifted nervously, his hands unconsciously checking and rechecking his gear. This would be his first exposure to advanced combat training, having spent most of his military career in communications roles far from frontline action. The prospect of room clearing exercises and simulated firefights clearly unsettled him. "Relax," Vasquez whispered, without moving her lips or breaking her forward gaze. "Trust your training and think before you move. Speed comes with practice." 3 positions to her left, Specialist Marcus Hayes stretched his neck and rolled his shoulders, preparing for what he expected to be a demonstration of superior physical capabilities. His Texas swagger had only grown more pronounced over the past few days, fed by successful completion of the physical challenges that had eliminated weaker candidates. "Time to separate the wheat from the chaff," Hayes murmured to Specialist Trevor Williams, who stood directly in front of him. "This touchy-feely team-building stuff is over. Now we get to see who can actually fight." Williams nodded agreement, his pale blue eyes focused on the mock urban training facility visible in the distance. The structure resembled a small town, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleyways, and hidden sniper positions. Smoke generators and blank ammunition would add realism to scenarios, designed to push candidates beyond their comfort zones. Rodriguez divided the group into 6-person Teams mixing experience levels and backgrounds to create maximum challenge. Vasquez found herself assigned to Team Bravo alongside Hayes, Williams, Mitchell, Torres, and a newly introduced candidate named Staff Sergeant Rachel Chun, a military intelligence specialist whose quiet confidence masked extensive combat experience. In Iraq and Syria. Interesting mix, Chun observed as the team gathered around their equipment table. Her voice carried a slight accent, remnants of her childhood in San Francisco's Chinatown, but her military bearing was unmistakably American. Me, MPS, Airborne, Armor, Engineers, and Communications. Someone's testing our adaptability. Hayes examined the gear spread before them. Simulated weapons with laser targeting systems, tactical radios, breaching charges, and medical supplies. Everything needed for complex urban operations, but also enough equipment to overwhelm inexperienced leaders who couldn't prioritize effectively. Standard stack formation, Hayes declared, automatically assuming command authority. Williams takes point, I'll follow. Then Chun and Vasquez in the middle, Torres and Mitchell bringing up the rear. We move fast, clear rooms efficiently, and maintain communication throughout. Vasquez studied the tactical map of their assigned building while Hayes outlined his plan. The structure was 3 stories tall with multiple entry points, stairwells at both ends, and numerous rooms that could conceal simulated enemies or civilians. Intelligence reports indicated the presence of high-value targets, but also warned of potential booby traps and ambush positions. This approach puts us in a fatal funnel, she said, tracing a finger along Hayes's proposed route. Single stairwell, multiple angles of attack, no fallback position if we encounter resistance. Hayes looked up from the equipment he was distributing. You got a better idea, or are you just pointing out problems again? Alternative entry through the rear service corridor, Vasquez replied, pointing to a section of the building plan that Hayes had overlooked. Provides multiple escape routes and limits enemy angles of fire. We can establish overwatch positions and move in coordinated bounds. Williams studied both options for several seconds. His airborne training had included urban warfare, but most of his experience involved larger unit operations rather than small team tactics. The rear approach is more complex, he said finally. Higher chance of confusion or miscommunication. Complexity creates opportunities, Chun interjected quietly. Enemy expects standard frontal assault. Alternative approach maintains element of surprise. Torres nodded agreement. Engineering perspective says she's right about the fatal funnel. Standard approach puts the entire team at risk if we hit prepared defenses. Hayes felt his authority being challenged and responded with increased aggression. Look, we can analyze this all day, but when the shooting starts, you need decisive leadership, not committee discussions. My plan is solid, proven, and achievable. We're going with it. The instructor's whistle signaled the beginning of the exercise. Team Bravo moved toward their assigned building while other teams dispersed to their own objectives. The mock urban environment was eerily realistic, complete with civilian mannequins, scattered debris, and the constant background noise of simulated combat from neighboring scenarios. Hayes led them to the main entrance, a heavy steel door that would require breaching charges to open. Williams positioned himself for immediate entry while the rest of the team stacked behind him in single file. The formation was textbook perfect, exactly what any military manual would recommend for this type of operation. The breaching charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed off surrounding buildings. Williams moved through the doorway immediately, his weapon sweeping left and right to clear the immediate area. Hayes followed closely, then Chun and Vasquez, their movements synchronized through countless hours of training. The ground floor appeared, empty except for overturned furniture and scattered papers that suggested recent evacuation. Simulated gunfire echoed from upper floors, indicating active resistance that would need to be neutralized. Hayes directed the team toward the main stairwell, maintaining his predetermined plan despite growing evidence that they were walking into exactly the type of ambush Vasquez had predicted. Halfway up the stairs, the first laser shots began impacting around them. Red lights flashed on their tactical vests, indicating simulated hits that would have been wounds or fatalities in actual combat. Williams took a hit to the shoulder that temporarily disabled his weapon arm. Chun was killed by a shot to the chest, forcing her to lie motionless for the remainder of the scenario, suppressing fire. Hayes shouted, but their position in the narrow stairwell made effective return fire impossible. They were trapped exactly where Vasquez had warned they would be, facing an enemy who held every tactical advantage. Mitchell panicked under pressure, fumbling with his radio and calling for backup that wouldn't arrive in time to help. Torres attempted to provide covering fire, but couldn't establish effective angles from their exposed position. Within 90 seconds, the entire team had been eliminated by defenders who had simply waited for them to enter the kill zone. The exercise ended with a sharp whistle blast. Simulated enemies emerged from their concealed positions, shaking hands with the dead candidates and offering tactical critiques. The instructor, who had been observing from a nearby building, approached with his evaluation clipboard already filled with notes. Predictable approach, inadequate reconnaissance, poor tactical flexibility, he announced. Team Alpha completed this same scenario in under 6 minutes with 0 casualties. Team Bravo lasted 90 seconds and achieved none of their objectives. Hayes's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. The intelligence was incomplete, he protested. No mention of prepared defensive positions or multiple enemy combatants. Intelligence is always incomplete, the instructor replied flatly. Successful Rangers adapt to changing circumstances instead of blindly following predetermined plans. As they walked back to the equipment tables, Chun fell into step beside Vasquez. Despite being killed early in the scenario, she had continued observing and learning. Your alternative approach would have worked, she said quietly. Rear entrance. Multiple routes, coordinated movement. Basic small unit tactics. Doesn't matter now, Vasquez replied. What matters is learning from mistakes and doing better next time. But Hayes had a different perspective on the failure. As they cleaned and returned their equipment, he gathered Williams and several other candidates around him. Problem with this whole setup, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, is too many people trying to second-guess experienced leadership. You get paralysis by analysis when everyone thinks they're a tactical genius. Williams nodded agreement, though his expression suggested some uncertainty. Decisive action beats perfect planning every time, he said. Can't win wars with committee meetings. Vasquez continued cleaning her weapon without responding to the obvious criticism. She had learned long ago that defending herself against unfair blame only created more conflict. Results would speak louder than arguments. The afternoon brought individual skills assessments that played more directly to each candidate's background and training. Marksmanship courses that tested precision under pressure. Medical scenarios that required quick thinking and steady hands. Navigation exercises that challenged spatial reasoning and attention to detail. Vasquez excelled at the medical training, her MP experience having provided extensive exposure to trauma care and emergency response. When presented with a simulated casualty suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, she rapidly established priorities, controlled bleeding, and stabilized the patient for evacuation. Her movements were confident and sure, guided by muscle memory developed through years of real-world application. Mitchell struggled with the same scenario, his communications background having provided minimal medical training. He hesitated at critical moments, uncertain about treatment priorities and proper procedures. Vasquez noticed his difficulty and quietly offered guidance between rotations. Airway, breathing, circulation, she reminded him. Always in that order. Control massive bleeding first, then worry about everything else. Easy to say when you're not the one responsible for keeping someone alive, Mitchell replied nervously. You are responsible, Vasquez said firmly but kindly. That's why we train. So when the moment comes, you know what to do without thinking about it. During the marksmanship assessment, Hayes demonstrated the raw shooting skills that had made him successful as a tank gunner. His accuracy was impressive, particularly at longer ranges where his steady hands and good eyes provided clear advantages. Williams matched his performance, airborne training having emphasized precision, shooting under various conditions. Vasquez's scores were consistently solid without being spectacular. She approached each firing position methodically, adjusting for wind and range with careful calculation rather than instinctive feel. Her shots grouped tightly around the center of each target, demonstrating competence rather than exceptional natural ability. Textbook shooting, observed Master Sergeant Davis, one of the cadre members supervising the range. Not flashy, but reliable. Sometimes that's more valuable than raw talent. The day's final exercise involved night navigation through dense forest, using only map, compass, and red-filtered flashlights. Each candidate was given different coordinates to locate, ensuring that success depended on individual skill rather than following others. Vasquez found herself paired with Torres for safety purposes, though they were required to navigate independently. The forest was thick with undergrowth and fallen logs that made movement difficult even in daylight. At night, with limited visibility, every step required careful consideration. This is like swimming through black water, Torres muttered as he fought through a patch of thorny vines. Can't see anything beyond your own feet. Vasquez had stopped to take a compass bearing, using her red light to read the instrument without destroying her night vision. Trust your instruments more than your instincts, she said. Ground looks different in the dark, but magnetic north never changes. They separated to find their individual objectives, Torres heading west while Vasquez turned north toward her assigned coordinate. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sounds of other candidates crashing through underbrush and the occasional radio check from the cadre members monitoring their progress. 20 minutes into the exercise, Vasquez heard someone calling for help from a direction that suggested they were lost and potentially in danger. The voice was unfamiliar, possibly one of the newer candidates who had joined the program after the initial group. Following the sound, she found Private Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to the instructor, tangled in fallen branches and clearly disoriented. The young soldier was close to panic, having lost her compass during a fall and unable to determine direction in the darkness. I'm completely turned around, Rodriguez admitted. Don't even know which way I came from. Vasquez helped free her from the tangled branches and shared her own red light to assess the situation. Where's your last known position? She asked. About 10 minutes ago I was at a creek, Rodriguez replied. But I can't find it again. Water flows downhill, Vasquez said. Listen for the sound and follow it back. That'll give you a reference. Point to restart your navigation. She spent 15 minutes helping Rodriguez reorient herself and develop a plan to reach her objective. The assistance cost Vasquez valuable time and potentially compromised her own performance, but she never hesitated to provide help. Why are you doing this? Rodriguez asked as they prepared to separate again. You could have just kept going and finished first. Because that's what Rangers do, Vasquez replied simply. We don't leave people behind. She completed her own navigation. Exercise 40 minutes later, arriving at the designated checkpoint, tired but successful. Several other candidates had already finished, including Hayes and Williams, who had completed their routes in record time. Where were you? Hayes asked, as she reported to the checkpoint. We finished 20 minutes ago. Had to make a detour, Vasquez replied without elaborating. Rodriguez arrived 30 minutes later, successfully completing her navigation despite the earlier difficulties. She sought out Vasquez immediately, thanking her again for the assistance, and explaining to others how she had been helped when she was lost and frightened. The story spread quickly among the candidates. Some viewed Vasquez's actions as evidence of leadership and character. Others, led by Hayes and Williams, saw it as poor prioritization and misplaced sentiment that had no place in elite military training. "This isn't summer camp," Hayes declared during the evening debrief. "You can't hold everyone's hand and expect to succeed at this level. Sometimes people fail, and that's how it should be." "Leaving soldiers behind isn't strength," Torres replied. "It's just selfishness disguised as toughness." The debate continued through dinner and into the evening, dividing the candidates into clear factions. Some admired Vasquez's willingness to sacrifice personal success to help others. Others agreed with Hayes that such behavior was inappropriate for future Rangers who would face life and death decisions in combat. As the day ended and candidates prepared for sleep, Vasquez sat on her bunk and reviewed the day's events in her personal journal. The physical challenges had been manageable, the tactical exercises had revealed areas for improvement, and the leadership dynamics were becoming clearer with each passing hour. Master Sergeant Davis appeared at her bunk just before lights out. "Good work today, Vasquez," he said quietly, "particularly during the navigation exercise." "Thank you, Master Sergeant," she replied. "Leadership isn't always about being first," Davis continued. "Sometimes it's about making sure everyone gets there safely." After he left, Vasquez lay back on her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. Outside, Georgia crickets chirped in rhythm with distant training exercises that continued through the night. Somewhere in the darkness, other candidates were pushing themselves toward their limits, driven by the same combination of ambition and dedication that had brought them all to this place. The mockery hadn't disappeared, but it was beginning to compete with grudging respect from candidates who had witnessed her competence firsthand. Hayes and Williams still questioned her presence, but their criticism now focused on philosophy rather than ability. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and new tests of character that would determine whether she had what it took to wear the Ranger tab. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, among soldiers who understood that strength came in many forms, and that true leadership revealed itself through actions rather than words. The path forward remained uncertain, but each day brought her closer to her goal. And with each challenge overcome, the whispers of doubt grew a little quieter, while the voices of respect grew a little stronger. Week 3 at Fort Benning brought a significant shift in the program's intensity. The Georgia summer had reached its peak, with temperatures climbing past 95 degrees by mid-morning and humidity levels that made every breath feel like drowning in warm soup. 28 candidates remained from the original 37, their numbers reduced by injuries, voluntary withdrawals, and academic failures that had eliminated those unable to adapt to the program's demands. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Morrison arrived at the base on a Tuesday morning, her black sedan cutting through the heat shimmer rising from the asphalt. Morrison was a legend in Ranger circles, the first woman to complete the program when it opened to female candidates, and now one of the Army's most respected experts on small unit tactics and unconventional warfare. Her presence at Fort Benning was officially described as a routine inspection, but everyone understood the real purpose. Political theater. Specialist Marcus Hayes muttered as he watched Morrison's vehicle disappear toward the command building. "They're checking up on their diversity experiment." Specialist Trevor Williams nodded agreement while adjusting his gear for the morning's exercise. "Pressure's on to make sure at least one female makes it through. Can't have the program look exclusionary." The comment carried to Elena Vasquez, who was methodically checking her equipment 30 feet away. She had learned to identify the subtle changes in conversation tone that preceded criticism. The way voices carried, just far enough to ensure she heard without providing opportunity for direct confrontation. Staff Sergeant Rachel Chun, securing. Her rifle sling nearby shook her head at Williams' comment. Maybe she's here because we've got some of the strongest candidates the program has seen in years, she suggested. Not everything revolves around gender politics. Right, Hayes replied with obvious sarcasm. Pure coincidence that a female colonel shows up just when they need to justify keeping women in the program. The morning's exercise involved advanced patrol tactics in the dense pine forest surrounding the base. Each candidate would lead a 4-person team through enemy territory, locate specific intelligence targets, and extract without detection. Leadership rotations ensured that everyone would eventually command and be commanded by their peers. Vasquez found herself assigned to Bravo Team alongside Sergeant Paul Mitchell, Private First Class Danny Sullivan, a former infantry soldier, from the 101st Airborne, and Specialist James Crawford, a soft-spoken medic whose quiet competence had earned respect throughout the program. The twist came when Master Sergeant Davis announced the leadership assignments. Vasquez, your team leader for today's exercise. Your objective is the communications bunker at grid coordinate November 7 Alpha. Intelligence indicates enemy presence, but numbers and disposition are unknown. A ripple of surprise ran through the assembled candidates. Vasquez had demonstrated tactical competence repeatedly, but this was her first opportunity to command during a major field exercise. The assignment placed her in direct comparison with other team leaders, including Hayes and Williams, who would be running parallel missions. Interesting choice, Williams commented to his own team members. Guess we'll see if she can actually lead or just point out problems with other people's plans. Hayes was more direct in his criticism. Hope Bravo Team brought their own maps, he said loudly enough for several teams to hear. Because following someone who's never led anything bigger than a motor pool patrol is a good way to get lost. Vasquez gathered her team around the tactical map, ignoring the commentary from nearby groups. The communications bunker sat 2 kilometers north of their starting position, accessible through dense forest that offered excellent concealment, but also limited visibility and difficult navigation. Enemy forces were reported in the area, though their exact positions remained unknown. Thoughts on approach? She asked her team, spreading the map where everyone could study it. Sullivan, whose infantry background provided extensive patrol experience, traced a finger along the most direct route. Straight shot through the valley gives us good time, but zero concealment if there are observation posts on the ridges. Crawford pointed to an alternative path that followed a creek bed for most of the distance. Water route provides natural cover and muffles sound, but adds 30 minutes to our movement time. Mitchell studied both options nervously. His communications background had provided minimal field experience, and the prospect of enemy contact clearly unsettled him. What if we encounter resistance? Do we have backup plans? We avoid contact entirely if possible, Vasquez replied. This is reconnaissance, not assault. Our job is to gather intelligence and return with it, not to engage the enemy. She outlined her plan. Approach through the creek bed for maximum concealment. Establish an observation post 500 meters from the target. Conduct detailed reconnaissance and extract via a different route to avoid detection. The plan was cautious and methodical, prioritizing mission success over speed. From the adjacent team, he shook his head dismissively. Analysis paralysis, he said to Williams. While she's drawing diagrams, we'll be halfway to the objective. Alpha Team, led by Hayes, departed first with their characteristic aggressive approach. They moved quickly through the forest, maintaining a direct route toward their assigned target. Their confidence was evident in their pace and posture. Soldiers who believed that speed and determination could overcome any obstacle. Charlie Team, commanded by Williams, followed a similar philosophy but with slightly more tactical sophistication. Williams' airborne training had emphasized rapid insertion and quick mission completion. principles that guided his team's movement through the terrain. Vasquez led Bravo team along the creek bed, their movement deliberately slow and careful. The water muffled their footsteps while overhanging vegetation provided natural camouflage. Every 100 meters he called a halt to listen for signs of enemy activity or other teams moving through the area. "This is taking forever," Sullivan whispered during one of their security halts. "Other teams are probably already at their objectives." "Other teams might also be walking into ambushes," Vasquez replied quietly. "Patience keeps people alive." Crawford, scanning their surroundings with practiced eyes, nodded agreement. "Better to arrive late than not at all. Intelligence gathering requires stealth, not speed." The creek route proved its value when they heard voices. Ahead, enemy role-players positioned exactly where the direct approach would have taken them. Vasquez signaled for her team to freeze while she assessed the situation. 3 role-players were positioned in a natural choke point, perfectly placed to detect and engage any team using the obvious approach. She led her team in a wide detour that added another 20 minutes to their movement, but kept them completely undetected. The extra time investment paid dividends when they reached their observation post and found the communications bunker exactly where intelligence had indicated from their concealed position. Vasquez and her team conducted detailed surveillance of the target. They identified guard positions, documented communication equipment visible through open doors, and noted patrol patterns that would affect any future operations against the facility. 2 guards on rotation, radio equipment visible in the main bunker. Single vehicle parked behind the structure, Crawford whispered as he sketched the layout in his notebook. Mitchell, operating the team's long-range radio, established communication with base camp and prepared to transmit their intelligence report. His nervous energy had settled into focused concentration as the mission progressed. "Wait," Vasquez said softly, holding up her hand. "Listen." In the distance, they could hear the distinctive sounds of simulated combat black ammunition, shouted commands, and the organized chaos of military training exercises. One of the other teams had made contact with enemy forces, exactly the outcome that Vasquez's cautious approach had been designed to avoid. "That's coming from grid November 6 Charlie," Sullivan observed, checking his map. "Alpha team's objective area." Through their radio, they heard Hayes' voice calling for backup and medical assistance. His team had walked into a well-prepared ambush, suffering multiple casualties and failing to reach their assigned target. The aggressive approach that had seemed so confident at the beginning had led to tactical disaster. "Should we assist?" Crawford asked, his medic instincts responding to the calls for help. "Negative," Vasquez replied. "Our mission is intelligence gathering. Alpha Team has their own support protocols." She directed Mitchell to transmit their reconnaissance report while maintaining their concealed position. The intelligence they had gathered was detailed and accurate, providing base camp with a complete picture of the enemy facility and its defenses. 20 minutes later, Charlie Team's radio traffic indicated they had also encountered problems. Williams' team had successfully reached their objective, but had been detected during their reconnaissance, forcing them into a running firefight that compromised their intelligence gathering mission. Bravo team completed their withdrawal without detection, following a carefully planned extraction route that took them through different terrain to avoid predictable movement patterns. They returned to base camp as the only team to complete their mission without casualties or compromise. Master Sergeant Davis met them at the checkpoint, his expression neutral but his eyes showing approval. "Clean mission, Vasquez. No contact. Complete intelligence package, 0 compromises. Textbook reconnaissance. Team effort, Master Sergeant," she replied. Everyone contributed to the success, but Hayes and Williams had different perspectives on the day's outcomes. As the teams gathered for after-action reviews, their criticism was immediate and pointed. "Easy to avoid contact when you move so slow the enemy dies of old age," Hayes sighed. his face still flushed with embarrassment from his team's failure. Real combat doesn't give you all day to analyze every decision. Williams, whose team had salvaged partial success from their compromised mission, nodded agreement. Sometimes you have to accept risk to achieve objectives. Can't win wars by hiding in creek beds. Can't win wars by walking into obvious ambushes either, Crawford interjected quietly. His medic training had made him acutely aware of casualty prevention, and Hayes' criticism struck him as misguided. Sullivan, whose infantry experience provided credibility on tactical matters, supported Vasquez more directly. Reconnaissance is about gathering information, not proving how tough you are. Bravo team completed the mission while everyone else got people killed. The debate continued through the formal after-action review, where instructors analyzed each team's performance in clinical detail. Vasquez's methodical approach was praised for its effectiveness, but some candidates interpreted the praise as favoritism rather than earned recognition. Typical, Hayes muttered to a group of supporters during the evening meal. Careful, cautious, politically correct. Exactly what the brass wants to see from their diversity showcase. Private Rodriguez, who had been helped by Vasquez during the navigation exercise, overheard the comment and responded angrily. Maybe she succeeded because she's actually good at this, not because of some conspiracy. Right, Hayes replied. Pure coincidence that the female candidate gets the easiest mission and the most support from instructors. The division among candidates had become increasingly clear. Roughly half respected Vasquez's competence and leadership potential, while the other half, led by Hayes and Williams, viewed her success as artificially manufactured for political purposes. The tension came to a head during the week's final exercise, a complex night operation that required multiple teams to coordinate attacks against separate objectives. Vasquez was assigned as overall mission commander, responsible for synchronizing the actions of 4 different teams across several kilometers of terrain. This is ridiculous, Williams said openly during the mission briefing. She's never commanded anything larger than a 4-person team, and now they want her to coordinate a company-sized operation. Hayes was even more direct in his opposition. I'm not taking orders from someone who's never proven she can handle real pressure. This whole thing is set up for failure. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who had been observing the training quietly for several days, stepped forward to address the complaints. Her presence silenced the murmuring candidates immediately. Specialist Hayes, you have concerns about the mission parameters? She asked, her voice carrying the authority of years in command. Hayes straightened to attention, suddenly aware that his criticism had been overheard by senior leadership. No, ma'am, just discussing tactical options. Good, Morrison replied. Because in my experience, the best leaders often emerge from unexpected places. I'm interested to see how this exercise develops. As the teams prepared for the night operation, the pressure on Vasquez intensified beyond anything she had previously experienced. Half the candidates questioned her authority. Several instructors were watching for signs of failure, and a senior officer was evaluating her performance for reasons that remained unclear. But the greatest pressure came from her own understanding of the stakes involved. Success would validate her presence in the program and possibly silence her critics. Failure would confirm their suspicions and potentially end her chances of earning the Ranger tab. Standing in the equipment shed as her teams prepared for deployment, Vasquez felt the weight of expectations and skepticism pressing down like the humid Georgia air. Every decision would be analyzed, every command evaluated, every mistake magnified. Outside, night was falling over Fort Benning with the promise of challenges that would test everything she had learned about leadership, tactics, and her own capabilities. The mockery that had greeted her arrival had evolved into something more dangerous, organized opposition that questioned not just her competence, but her right to be there at all. The radio crackled with final equipment checks as her teams reported ready for deployment. In a few minutes, she would lead 30 soldiers into the darkness, their success or failure resting on her ability to coordinate complex operations under the most demanding conditions the program could create. The isolation was complete now. Standing alone in command while others questioned her authority, preparing to prove herself against odds that seemed deliberately stacked against her success. But isolation also brought clarity, the understanding that she had earned her place through competence, not politics, and that the only validation that mattered would come from mission success. The night operation would either establish her as a leader worthy of respect or confirm the suspicions of those who believed she didn't belong. Either way, the time for proving herself had arrived. The operations tent buzzed with controlled tension as Elena Vasquez spread tactical maps across the aluminum table. Overhead lights cast harsh shadows across topographical features that would become life-or-death navigation points in less than 2 hours. The night operation designated exercise. Blackwater represented the most complex challenge the remaining 26 candidates had faced, requiring coordination between 4 separate teams across 12 square kilometers of unforgiving terrain. Outside, Fort Benning's summer evening carried the distant rumble of thunder, promising storms that would add another layer of difficulty to an already demanding mission. Weather reports indicated possible rainfall beginning around midnight, with visibility dropping to near zero and communications potentially compromised by atmospheric interference. Vasquez studied the intelligence briefing one final time, her mind automatically cataloging the critical information that would determine success or failure. The primary objective was a simulated enemy command post located in a fortified position 3 kilometers northeast of their starting point. Secondary targets included communication relay stations, supply depots, and observation posts that formed an integrated defense network. Complex is an understatement, muttered Staff Sergeant Rachel Chun as she reviewed her team's specific assignment. 4 separate approach routes, synchronized timing requirements, and backup plans for everything that could go wrong. Chun had been assigned as leader of Delta Team, responsible for neutralizing the northernmost observation post before the main assault commenced. Her military intelligence background provided expertise in enemy analysis and tactical assessment. But she had never commanded a field operation of this magnitude. Sergeant First Class David Kim, now leading Charlie Team, traced potential infiltration routes with his finger. "Weather's going to be the wild card," he observed. "Rain changes. Everything visibility, movement speed, radio reliability. We need contingencies for communication failure." Kim's 3 tours in Afghanistan had taught him to expect the unexpected, particularly during night operations where small problems could cascade into mission-ending disasters. His reserved demeanor masked deep concerns about the operations complexity and the political pressures surrounding Vasquez's leadership role. At the far end of the tent, Specialist Marcus Hayes huddled with Alpha Team members, their voices kept deliberately low but their body language radiating skepticism. Hayes had been assigned the most challenging objective, a direct assault on the main command post that would require precise timing and flawless coordination with the other teams. "This whole thing is backwards," Hayes said quietly to Specialist Trevor Williams, who stood beside him studying equipment lists. "The mission commander should be directing from a central position, not trying to micromanage 4 different teams across miles of terrain." Williams nodded agreement while checking his weapon's laser targeting system. Standard doctrine calls for delegated authority and clear communication protocols. You can't run this kind of operation like a chess game where one person moves all the pieces. Their criticism reflected genuine tactical concerns, but also deeper resentment about Vasquez's selection as mission commander. Both men had extensive combat experience and strong leadership records, making their subordinate roles feel like deliberate humiliation rather than training opportunity. Vasquez overheard fragments of their conversation while finalizing coordination procedures. She understood their frustration command. Selection often seemed arbitrary in training environments where political considerations could override purely military factors. But understanding didn't eliminate the need to prove that her appointment was based on competence rather than external pressure. "Final communications check," she announced, gathering the team leaders around the radio equipment. "Primary frequency is secure channel 7, backup on channel 12. Weather may cause interference, so we'll use predetermined code words for critical updates." She distributed laminated cards containing the communication protocols, each team receiving slight variations to maintain operational security. The codes were simple but effective. Sunrise meant mission success. Sunset indicated failure. Storm called for immediate extraction. Master Sergeant Davis entered the tent carrying updated weather reports and a sealed envelope marked with official stamps. His expression was unreadable, but tension lines around his eyes suggested complications that hadn't been anticipated. "Latest meteorological data," he announced, placing the weather update on the table. "The storm front is moving faster than predicted. Rain begins at 2,200 hours. Heavy precipitation expected by midnight. Visibility will drop to less than 50 meters. The news sent ripples of concern through the assembled team leaders. Night operations were challenging enough under clear conditions, but adding severe weather created exponentially more difficulty. Navigation would become nearly impossible, communication reliability would plummet, and the risk of accidents would increase dramatically. "There's more," Davis continued, opening the sealed envelope. "Intelligence update indicates enemy forces have been reinforced. Additional observation posts, roving patrols, and quick reaction forces positioned throughout the operational area." Hayes looked up from his map with obvious frustration. "So we're supposed to coordinate 4 teams through a storm against an enemy that's been reinforced since the original briefing. This is starting to look like a setup for failure." "Missions don't wait for perfect conditions," Davis replied evenly. "Rangers operate in whatever environment they encounter. Adaptability under pressure is exactly what we're evaluating." Vasquez absorbed the new information while recalculating timing and coordination requirements. The reinforced enemy presence meant longer approach routes to avoid detection, while the incoming weather would slow movement and complicate navigation. Every aspect of her carefully planned operation now required modification. "Team leaders, 15 minutes to update your plans," she announced. "Account for weather delays and enhanced enemy presence. We maintain the original objectives, but adjust tactics based on current conditions." The next quarter hour revealed the true test of leadership under pressure. While other commanders might have postponed the mission or requested simplified objectives, Vasquez began systematically adapting her plan to address each new challenge. She repositioned approach routes to take advantage of terrain features that would provide better concealment from the additional observation posts. Communication protocols were modified to account for weather interference, with backup methods established for critical coordination points. Timing was adjusted to allow for slower movement while maintaining synchronized attacks. "Delta Team shifts. Approach vector by 15 degrees to avoid the new observation post at grid reference Tango 4, she explained to Chun. "Extra time needed for the longer route, but improved chance of reaching your objective undetected." Chun studied the modified plan and nodded approval. "Makes sense. Better to arrive late and be successful than on time and be compromised." Kim received similar adjustments for Charlie Team. His route altered to take advantage of a creek bed that would mask sound and provide concealment during the predicted rainfall. The changes demonstrated tactical flexibility while maintaining the overall mission concept. "Alpha Team maintains direct assault on the primary target," she told Hayes, "but delayed by 20 minutes to ensure other teams neutralize supporting positions first. Your approach benefits most from the diversionary effects of coordinated attacks." Hayes studied the updated timeline with obvious skepticism. 20-minute delay means we're moving through that kill zone in the middle of a thunderstorm. Visibility will be zero, communications unreliable, and coordination nearly impossible. Weather affects the enemy too, Vasquez replied. Their observation capabilities will be just as degraded. The storm might actually provide a tactical advantage if we adapt properly. Williams, reviewing his own team's modified assignment, shook his head doubtfully. Lot of variables to manage simultaneously. One team misses their timing, and the whole operation falls apart. That's why we have contingency plans, Vasquez said, pointing to the backup procedures outlined on each team's instruction sheet. Multiple options for every phase, predetermined decision points, and clear authority delegation if communication fails. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison entered the tent as final preparations were being completed. Her presence immediately focused everyone's attention, the casual conversation dying into professional silence. She had spent the afternoon observing training exercises and reviewing candidate performance records, but her evaluation criteria remained mysterious. Status report, Vasquez, Morrison said, approaching the tactical display. Final preparations. Complete, ma'am. Teams briefed on objectives and contingency plans. Weather and intelligence updates incorporated into the operational timeline, ready to commence on schedule. Morrison studied the tactical layout with the experienced eye of someone who had planned and executed countless real-world operations. Her attention focused on the coordination requirements, the adapted routes, and the contingency procedures that would determine success or failure. Complex operation, she observed. Multiple moving parts, degraded conditions, reinforced opposition. High probability of communication failures and timing problems. Yes, ma'am, Vasquez replied. But achievable with proper preparation and flexible execution. We'll see, Morrison said, her tone neutral but her eyes revealing sharp interest in the outcome. As Morrison departed, the tension in the tent became almost palpable. Everyone understood that this exercise would determine more than just training grades or program advancement. The success or failure of Exercise Blackwater would either validate Vasquez's leadership potential or confirm the suspicions of those who questioned her presence in the program. Hayes gathered Alpha Team for final equipment checks, his movements sharp with frustrated energy. Remember, this isn't just about completing the mission, he told his team members. This is about proving that political correctness doesn't trump military competence. His words carried beyond his intended audience, reaching other candidates who were making similar preparations. The comment crystallized the underlying tension that had been building throughout the program, the question of whether Vasquez's success was earned through ability or manufactured through institutional pressure. Chen overheard the remark and responded with controlled anger. Her tactical plans have been solid from day one, she said loud enough for Hayes to hear. Maybe focus on your own performance instead of looking for excuses. Easy to say when you're not the one carrying the hardest objective, Williams replied, stepping beside Hayes in a show of solidarity. Some people get carefully managed challenges while others face the real tests. The exchange highlighted the fundamental division that had developed among the candidates. Roughly half viewed Vasquez as a competent leader whose success reflected genuine ability. The other half, led by Hayes and Williams, saw her advancement as the result of lowered standards and political manipulation. Torres, preparing Bravo Team's equipment nearby, shook his head at the ongoing argument. Politics don't matter when bullets start flying, he said quietly. Good leadership works regardless of who's providing it. King remained silent but watched the interactions with growing concern. His combat experience had taught him that unit cohesion was essential for mission success, and the obvious friction between team leaders could prove more dangerous than enemy opposition. As 2,000 hours approached, the teams completed final preparations and moved toward their deployment positions. The air was thick with humidity and electrical tension from the approaching storm. Lightning flickered on the horizon, followed by distant thunder that seemed to echo the competitive pressure surrounding the exercise. Vasquez conducted final radio checks with each team leader, confirming communication protocols and synchronized timing. Her voice remained calm and professional, despite the weight of expectations and criticism that surrounded her command. All stations, commo check. Delta, how to copy? Delta reads you 5 by 5, Chung responded. Charlie, commo check. Charlie copies, Kim replied, his tone neutral but professional. Alpha, final communications verification. Hayes paused before responding, the silence stretching just long enough to suggest reluctance. Alpha standing by, he said finally. Bravo. Confirm ready status. Bravo team ready for deployment. Torres answered promptly. The final countdown began as teams moved to their starting positions. Weather conditions were deteriorating exactly as predicted, with the first raindrops beginning to fall and visibility already compromised by gathering darkness. Standing in the command post tent, Vasquez felt the full weight of leadership responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 30 minutes, she would commit 4 teams to a complex night operation through hostile territory and dangerous weather. Success would require flawless coordination, tactical flexibility, and the kind of leadership that earned respect through results rather than rank. The discovery phase was complete. She had identified every challenge, prepared for every contingency, and developed plans that could adapt to changing conditions. Now came the true test of whether preparation and competence could overcome skepticism and resistance. Outside, thunder rolled across Fort Benning with increasing intensity, nature providing a dramatic soundtrack for the most important test of her military career. The storm was coming, and with it, the moment when leadership theories would face the reality of command under pressure. At 20-30 hours, the first drops of rain began striking the Georgia pine canopy with the soft percussion of an approaching symphony. Elena Vasquez crouched in the command observation post, a hastily constructed shelter of camouflage netting and waterproof tarps that provided concealment while maintaining line of sight to the operational area. Through her night vision scope, she watched 4 green blips representing her teams as they moved toward their respective objectives across the darkening landscape. The radio crackled with the subdued voices of team leaders reporting their progress. Static interference was already beginning to degrade signal quality, exactly as the weather reports had predicted. By midnight, when the storm reached full intensity, communication would become sporadic and unreliable. Delta Team, 2 kilometers. From objective, moving through Sector 7, came Rachel Chun's whispered transmission. Her team was making good time despite the challenging terrain. Their military intelligence training evident in their careful movement through areas where enemy observation posts might detect careless infiltration. Charlie Team at Phase Line Alpha, continuing toward Observation Post Tango 2, reported David Kim. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had conducted countless night operations in far more dangerous environments than Georgia. Training Grounds. Elena checked her waterproof watch and noted both teams were slightly ahead of schedule, a positive development that provided buffer time for the inevitable complications that accompanied complex operations. She keyed her radio to acknowledge the reports while maintaining noise discipline that prevented enemy role players from tracking her location. Command copies all stations. Weather deteriorating on schedule. Maintain current pace and report any changes to enemy disposition. 2 kilometers to the southeast, Alpha Team was experiencing the first serious challenge of the night. Specialist Marcus Hayes led his assault team through dense undergrowth that had become increasingly treacherous as moisture made every surface slippery and unpredictable. Their objective, the main enemy command post, was the most heavily defended target, requiring them to penetrate multiple security layers without triggering early warning systems. Movement to our front, whispered Private Danny Sullivan, Alpha. Team's point man. Through his night vision device, he had detected the heat signature of an enemy patrol that wasn't supposed to be in this sector according to the original intelligence briefing. Hayes pressed himself against a massive pine trunk, while his team melted into the surrounding vegetation. The unexpected patrol represented exactly the kind of adaptation that real enemy forces would employ, and exactly the sort of complication that tested leadership decision-making under pressure. 6 personnel moving east to west across our planned approach route, Sullivan continued his whispered report. Appears to be a scheduled patrol, not random movement. Hayes faced a critical decision point. The direct approach that would have delivered his team to the objective on schedule was now blocked by enemy forces. Alternative routes would add significant time and potentially compromise coordination with the other teams. But attempting to bypass the patrol in close proximity risked detection and mission failure. Alpha Team to command, Hayes transmitted reluctantly. Encountering unexpected enemy patrol at grid November 6 Charlie. Request guidance on route modification. In the command post, Elena studied her tactical map while considering the implications of Hayes' report. The enemy patrol suggested that role players were adapting their defensive positions based on intelligence gathered during previous exercises. Static defensive plans were being replaced by dynamic responses, exactly what Rangers would encounter in real combat situations. Alpha, can you identify the patrol schedule and predict return timing? She asked. Negative, Command. First detection. Unknown whether this is routine or responsive to our presence. Elena made her decision with the kind of quick analysis that separated effective commanders from those who hesitated at critical moments. Alpha, hold position and observe patrol for 10 minutes. If a pattern emerges, exploit the timing window. If pattern unclear, shift to alternate route Bravo 7. Your mission timing adjusts to maintain coordination. The modification demonstrated exactly the kind of flexible leadership that the exercise was designed to test. Rather than rigidly maintaining original plans despite changed circumstances, she adapted tactics while preserving strategic objectives. Hayes acknowledged the guidance, but his tone carried subtle resistance. Copy, Command. Implementing alternate route if required. Meanwhile, Delta Team had reached their observation post objective without detection. Shun's careful approach through difficult terrain had positioned her team perfectly to neutralize the enemy position that provided early warning for the main command post assault. Delta in position for final approach, Chun reported. Target structure contains 3 role players, standard defensive configuration, beginning final infiltration now. Chun's team moved with practiced precision through the final 100 meters to their objective. Each member understood their specific role in the coordinated assault that would eliminate the observation post without alerting other enemy positions. Months of training had prepared them for exactly this type of small unit action. The attack itself lasted less than 90 seconds. Delta Team members moved simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the defensive position through superior positioning and tactical surprise. The enemy role players, equipped with laser detection systems, registered multiple hits that would have been fatal in actual combat. Sunrise, Chun transmitted using the predetermined code word for mission success. Delta objective neutralized. No casualties, no compromise. Elena felt the first wave of relief as one critical component of the operation succeeded exactly as planned. Delta Team's success eliminated a significant threat to Alpha Team's assault while proving that careful preparation and execution could overcome defensive advantages. Outstanding work, Delta. Maintain an overwatch position and report enemy reaction. Charlie. Team was approaching their own objective when the weather situation deteriorated dramatically. The scattered raindrops that had been falling for 30 minutes suddenly intensified into a steady downpour. That reduced visibility to less than 50 meters and created enough noise to mask movement, but also communication. Charlie team experiencing heavy precipitation, Kim reported, his voice barely audible through increasing static. Visibility severely reduced, moving to alternate navigation procedures. Kim's combat experience proved invaluable as conditions became more challenging. Instead of relying primarily on visual navigation, he shifted to dead reckoning and terrain association techniques learned during night operations in Afghanistan. His team maintained steady progress despite circumstances that would have stopped less experienced leaders. Command Charlie team may experience communication blackout due to weather interference. Continuing mission on timeline unless otherwise directed. Alina acknowledged while noting that her worst-case scenario was beginning to develop. Weather-induced. Communication failure would force team leaders to operate independently based on predetermined plans. Exactly the situation that skeptics had predicted would cause mission collapse. In Sector 9, Bravo team under Torres had encountered their own complications. Their secondary objective, a supply depot that intelligence indicated was lightly defended, had revealed significantly more enemy presence than briefings suggested. Bravo to command, Torres whispered urgently. Target shows heavy security. Presence. Count at least 8 role players, possibly more. Original plan insufficient for current threat level. The report confirmed Elena's growing suspicion that the exercise had been deliberately modified to test her ability to adapt to cascading complications. Each team was discovering that reality differed significantly from planning assumptions, forcing real-time tactical decisions that would determine success or failure. Bravo, can you achieve the mission with a modified approach, or do you require objective change? Torres studied the enemy positions through his night vision scope while considering alternatives. The supply depot represented a significant intelligence target, but attempting assault against superior numbers would likely result in team elimination and mission failure. Bravo can achieve through stealth approach rather than assault. Requires additional time but maintains mission integrity. Approved, Elena responded immediately. Adjust timeline as needed. Mission success takes priority over schedule adherence. The decision reflected mature leadership thinking that prioritized substance over form. By authorizing timeline modifications to accommodate reality, she demonstrated the kind of adaptive command philosophy that distinguished effective leaders from inflexible managers. Alpha. Team situation had become increasingly complex as Hayes attempted to navigate around the enemy. Patrol while maintaining approach timing. The alternate route required movement through marshy terrain that slowed progress significantly, while increasing the risk of noise that could compromise their position. Alpha experiencing significant terrain challenges, Hayes reported, his frustration evident despite attempts to maintain professional composure. Alternate route through wetland areas. Timeline will require adjustment. Elena checked her watch and calculated the cascading effects of multiple timeline changes. Charlie team was moving slowly due to weather. Bravo team needed extra time for stealth approach, and now Alpha team required additional time for terrain negotiation. The carefully choreographed operation was becoming a test of leadership flexibility under pressure. All stations, the advised timeline modifications approved across all teams. Focus on mission success rather than schedule adherence. Coordination. Maintained through periodic position reports. The modification represented exactly the kind of command decision that would either vindicate her leadership approach or confirm critics' suspicions about her ability to manage complex operations. By abandoning rigid scheduling in favor of adaptive execution, she was betting everything on her team's ability to achieve objectives despite deteriorating conditions. At 2,230 hours, Charlie team reached their observation post-objective just as communication conditions became critical. Kim's final transmission was barely audible through static and atmospheric interference. Charlie position beginning. Approach. Came the fragmented report. Elena made the difficult decision to continue the operation despite a communication blackout with one of her key teams. Military doctrine emphasized maintaining command and control, but real combat often required commanders to trust subordinate leaders when direct communication became impossible. Bravo team achieved their breakthrough 20 minutes later when Torres identified a vulnerability in the enemy security pattern. A gap in patrol coverage provided a narrow window for infiltration that would allow his team to gather intelligence without direct confrontation. Bravo initiating stealth approach, Torres reported. Window identified, beginning final phase. His team moved with exceptional skill through the enemy security perimeter, gathering photographic intelligence and documenting defensive positions without alerting the role players to their presence. The success validated Elena's decision to authorize tactical modifications rather than demanding adherence to original plans. Sunrise, Torres transmitted exactly 30 minutes later. Bravo objective complete. Intelligence package secured. Extraction initiated. Two teams had now succeeded through adaptive leadership and tactical flexibility. Elena felt mounting confidence that her approach was working, despite the complications that had seemed designed to cause failure. Alpha teams. Final assault commenced at 2,315 hours under the worst possible conditions. Heavy rain had turned the ground into slippery mud, while lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, disorienting flashes. Hayes led his team through the final approach to the main command post with grim determination to prove that aggressive tactics could succeed where careful planning had encountered obstacles. Alpha beginning final assault, has transmitted. Enemy position identified, multiple defensive layers confirmed. The attack revealed both the strengths and limitations of Hayes' leadership style. His team moved with impressive speed and coordination, overwhelming the first defensive line through superior firepower and tactical surprise. But the hastily planned assault had failed to account for secondary defensive positions that the enemy had established specifically to counter direct attacks. Alpha taking casualties, Hayes reported as laser systems registered multiple hits on his team members. Defensive positions are more extensive than intelligence indicated. Elena monitored the developing situation while calculating whether to authorize backup plans or allow Alpha Team to continue their modified assault. The decision would test her judgment about when to intervene versus when to trust subordinate commanders to adapt independently. Alpha, status report on mission viability, she requested. Alpha can complete the primary objective but will sustain additional casualties. Defensive positions neutralized but at significant cost. Hayes' report confirmed that aggressive tactics could achieve objectives, but often at prices that more careful approaches might avoid. Elena faced the fundamental command decision about acceptable losses versus mission success. Alpha authorized to complete the mission, medical support standing by for casualty evacuation. The final phase of Hayes' assault succeeded in neutralizing the enemy command post, but at the cost of 50% team casualties that would have been devastating in actual combat. The tactical victory came with strategic questions about whether alternative approaches might have achieved similar results at lower cost. Sunrise, Hayes finally transmitted. Alpha objective neutralized. Mission complete, but heavy casualties sustained. Elena conducted final coordination as all teams reported mission completion and began extraction procedures. Despite weather complications, communication failures, and enhanced enemy resistance, every objective had been achieved through adaptive leadership and tactical flexibility. All stations, mission complete. Begin extraction via predetermined routes. Command post will coordinate recovery and casualty evacuation. As teams began returning to base camp through the continuing storm, Elena remained in her observation post. to ensure complete accountability. The night's operation had tested every aspect of her leadership abilities, while providing ammunition for both supporters and critics to justify their positions. The rain continued falling as the last team cleared the operational area, washing away footprints and evidence of the night's activities. But the results would remain in official reports and performance evaluations that would determine who had proven themselves worthy of wearing the Ranger tab. In the darkness and rain of a Georgia night, Alina Vasquez had led 30 soldiers through the most complex operation of their training while adapting to every challenge that instructors and weather could provide. Whether that performance would silence her critics or fuel additional resistance remained to be determined when morning brought evaluation and analysis. The quiet action was complete, but the consequences were just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.